Hello, my name is Playgue, and welcome. Thank you for coming along for this journey. If you want to learn more about this device, you can check out any of the other tutorials in this playlist. I'm going to be talking about every effect on this machine, and I mean literally every single one. Because this video would be several hours long if I went super in depth, I am going to talk briefly about each one of these. And I do have in-depth tutorials on most of the effects on here that I will be referencing. But my goal by the end of this video is for you to know what every single effect on this device does. So let's talk about differences. The MK1 has 31 effects, but this has 54, sort of. A lot of the effects on the MK1 just got split into multiple effects, like the slicer, pan, delay, filter, and a lot of these could be under the same menu, but whatever. I want to show you this chart here. This is every single effect on the MK1. I did not make this chart. This is a chart that's provided in the instruction manual for the MK1. However, I did make this chart here. You can see that I have all the old effects that haven't really changed from the MK1. I have ones that have been updated, like have an actual reasonable overhaul to the effect. And then I have just brand new effects that are only on the MK2. We are going to talk about in depth these effects here in this video because I've already made tutorials for all of these effects in depth on this channel. But we should jump into understanding these effects first. So there's two things that I want to talk about before we learn each individual effect, and that is this extra menu as well as a sequencer. So this extra menu here is really simple to understand. Switch just toggles it on or off. Switch mode, you should notice these two words, moment and toggle, if you have the MK1 and assigns. So toggle means you push the button and it turns on. Moment means it only is on when you're pushing it. With insert, you can actually delegate certain effects to just affect certain tracks. So for example, if you wanted A and B to just affect track 2, you can set it to be on track 2 only. Next, let's talk about the sequencer. A sequencer is not on every single effect. And what a sequencer is a sequence of notes or commands or changes to the parameters that you have told it. So for example, in this case, we can change it to change the cutoff or the depth, and it'll change it in steps that way. Most of these are going to be the same. We have the rate, so how often is it going to each step? So in this case, every quarter note, it'll go to the next one in the sequence. How many, parts are in the sequence, how many parameter changes are in the sequence. So we can have 2. You'll always have the entire menu on display, but depending on what this number is right here, this will tell the device to only use this first 2, use only the first 3, and so on. So every quarter note, it'll change between these 2 parameters. So it'll go the depth, it'll change the depth to 540, 540, 540. If I increase that, it'll be 540, 0, 0, 540, 0, 0, 5, and so on. And that'll be the case for every single parameter that has a sequencer. You'll notice that some parameters, like let's say the transpose has just a dot. That just means it's the only parameter that you can change. That's all that dot means. All right, with all that introduction out of the way, we can get right into the tutorial. So let's start at the very beginning. We have our low-pass filter, our band-pass filter, and our high-pass filter. I already made a tutorial on these. There is no difference. We can sequence it, but yeah, here's the tutorial on that. Moving on, we have phaser. Phaser is the same, but we have a couple extra parameters that we can be more specific and granular about the phaser. So we have different stages, as well as we can actually affect the direct level, which is nice. So the phaser did get an upgrade in that regard, as well as the flanger. The flanger also has a few extra parameters, including direct level changes that we can use here. I'm going past these very quickly because, again, I have tutorials on this. If you want a video that's similar in style to this, that you just hear what it sounds like very quickly and briefly, check out this tutorial here where I go over every one of the effects that I'm skipping. Next, we have a synth. This is the same exact thing on the MK1. Next, we have a lo-fi. Lo-fi is, again, the same thing, but because this records in 32-bit instead of 16, we have just a bit more range in the bit depth, which is awesome. After that, we have radio, which is now our first effect that I'm going to go into deeper detail and play for you. Radio turns a signal into what would sound like it's coming out of a radio. This does this with a bit crusher, in this case a lo-fi, and there's even a little filter in there as well. So let's hear what that sounds like, and yeah. One thing to note is that you can do a lot of the effects on the MK2 on the MK1. I do have a tutorial on that. If you want to learn how to do MK2 strats on the MK1, I have actually 2 tutorials on that. And the radio is one of those effects that you can do on the MK1 as well. Next we have ring mod. This is again the same as the MK1. You'll notice that a lot of these effects will have this mode. What this is it's toggling between the MK2 version versus the MK1 version. The algorithm that processes the sound is upgraded on the MK2, so you can toggle between the new algorithm or you can have the old algorithm. And so that is what this mode means. Guitar to bass, once again, is the same, but we can toggle between MK1 and MK2 modes. Sustainer. So sustainer is very similar to dynamics in that it makes loud sounds quieter and quiet sounds louder. And it's good for mixing your audio. But how does this different from dynamics? Well, the sustainer has a lot more granular options and more ways that you can mess with it. And it's also stronger than the dynamics. So if dynamics isn't going enough for you, you can use this tool to get more out of your dynamics. Notice this is not a volume knob that we're messing with. It is a type of dynamics. Now, it's not compressing, it's actually altering the sound, so sometimes you'll get weird results depending on what you're using it on because of what it's doing. Next, we have auto riff. It'll take a sound, turn it into several pitches that create a melody. So if you're struggling to come up with a melody, or if you struggle to make melodies in general, you can use the auto riff and the different patterns to learn or hear a new type of melody. So I can demonstrate that by having the balance at 0, 100, and I'll go in, I can choose the key that my song will be in, but what it'll do is it'll change my one note into several. And that is what the auto riff does. Pretty cool. Next we have slow gear. Slow gear is exactly the same as it was, but we have MK2 mode now and MK1 mode. The transpose also is the same, but with the 2 different algorithms. Pitch bend, again, same, but with the 2 different algorithms. And finally, robot is the same, but with 2 different algorithms. Some of these do have sequencers, but the robot does not, which is really unfortunate because, holy crap, how helpful would that be to be able to change between notes in the robot? We have been doing that on the MK1 manually for years, and we can't do it on here for some reason. Also, the octave range is still limited by just 1 octave. We can't go outside the octave range. But our formant is a lot more various. So before we can only do +10 or -10, now we can go all the way to 50. Now some words have changed on this device from the MK1, so some things may be the same exact parameter, they're just named different. Perfect example is formant. That is just gender on the MK1. It just makes it sound brighter or darker. Next up, we have electric. Electric is like the robot and transpose combined. So we can affect the speed, the stability of the sound, and we can even affect the brightness of that. Da, 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 da. Next, we have our harmony effects. So we have our manual harmony here. Harmony is really, really dope. This is like Octave, but on steroids. With the Octave, you could just do -1 or -2 octaves. With the harmony, you can do it to a perfect third, fourth, fifth, sixth, even plus an octaves, and you can go down as well. Additionally, you can affect where the sound is, so you can pan one to the left or right, and you can even change the key in which your song is in. So all this thing is doing is just adding one extra voice that is however you specify, and it will play with whatever you are inputting. So in this case, I'll have it a perfect fifth above what this humming is, and you will hear the extra voice. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. It only has one voice, so if you want to make like 3 voices, you can have your original, and then you can have as many harmonies as you want on your effects. So you can have a whole chorus of 5 voices all happening at once, which that's really cool. Another thing that I thought about using this for is to figure out like how to make your own harmonies on your own. So for example, I want to harmonize with this, and I want it to be a fifth above. I could just turn my D level down, and then I could just replicate that sound. And there we go. So you can use this to kind of help train your ear to figuring out what notes to be able to sing or make. After our manual harmony, we have our auto harmony. Now this little M that's next to it, it means MIDI, because with the MIDI effects, they are used with extra devices, so like a launch pad or something like that. So if you have a extra MIDI device, that is what can control all of these parameters. You can technically use it without an extra device, like it still works just fine. But to get the full experience out of this, use it with an extra device like a launch pad. After that, we have Vocoder. Vocoder is the same, but we have a couple more parameters, which is really nice. It's pretty much the same thing that it was on the MK1, but it does have a little bit of a different sound. Just kind of play around with the vocoder and hear how that sounds. Next, we have the Oscillator vocoder. Again, it has that little M, meaning that it is a MIDI kind of effect, and you can affect all of these different parameters with your MIDI device. You can even change how the carrier sounds. And Inky actually has a really good tutorial on the Oscillator vocoder that you can check out. It basically, you can just play with your voice like it's a synthesizer. It's really, really cool. Next, we have Oscillator Bot. Oh man, it's everyone's favorite effect. The Oscillator Bot is super useful. It basically takes whatever signal is inputted and then simplifies it and outputs a tone that you can use and manipulate the note of. The note here can be changed, and in fact, we'll turn the balance to 0-100, so we just hear the Oscillator Bot. And we can even change how it sounds. And if we go over to note, we can change the note. I want you to also notice that the input sound also changes how the Oscillator Bot feels. So I'll even put on beatboxing, because you can do anything. You can go, shh, whatever. And I wish it went down more, but you can also transpose it down more. Unfortunately, it ends at C1. But yeah, that's really useful. Next, we have PreAmp. PreAmp is a amplifier simulator. You know those things that sit on the ground next to people's guitars? That is what this thing is trying to simulate. It's got a lot of different styles and a lot of different setups for the amplifier, And the parameters are all, if you have an amplifier, you will notice a lot of these knobs are present on a lot of different amplifiers. The amp type here kind of scrolls from cleanest to dirtiest. So as you go through, the sound becomes more and more distorted. Next, we have distortion. This is the same effect as the old one, the old vocal distortion. However, we have a lot more variation in how it distorts the input. And the only real difference here is the type of distortion, because there's a lot of different distortions out there. Two of them that may be a little confusing is the OD and DS. The OD is overdrive distortion, and DS is just distortion. But I have noticed that the vocal distortion on here is really, really weak compared to the vocal distortion on the MK1. So I have found that if you want to have a similar feel or a replica to the vocal distortion on the MK1, change it to a DS distortion instead. So I'll give you an example. I'll turn this down. Pretty weak, but let's see what this sounds like when it's boosted. That sounds a lot closer to a regular distortion on the MK1. All right, next up, we have dynamics. Dynamics is the same. It has all the same dynamics as the MK1. Not any different here. The EQ is the same as it was in the MK1, except we have a few more parameters in the mid-range. So our low mids and our high mids, we can alter the frequency in which we are picking out, as well as the Q. The Q is the quality, and I'll give you a little illustration of this. So you can think of these two lines as the frequency range, so low frequencies, high frequencies, and what each one does is you have 4 of them. Well, what Q is this will bring in or make this slope sharper, and it'll really dial in. So that is what Q is. Hopefully this diagram helps you understand that a little better. Next up, we have Isolator. This is the same as the old Isolator, except we have a new way to transition the Isolator. On the MK1, you can only make it go da 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 da, but here you can actually make it more smooth. So I'll give you an example. We'll cut out the lows of this bass track, and I'll put it on square. The square is the MK1's version. So if you wanted to sound more like the MK1 Isolator, put it on square. If you wanted to have more of a smooth transition, you put it on tri. Next we have Octave. Octave is the same as it was on the other one. We can toggle between MK1 and MK2 modes. And we even have a sequencer on this for some reason. Like, what? Next we have Auto Pan. Auto Pan is the same, but with a couple new parameters. And what's really going on here is it took Auto 1 and Auto 2 from the MK1 and combined them together into one effect. So now we have a lot more control over what our pan is sounding like. And with the manual pan, it is the same exact thing on the MK1 version, where you can pan sound to the left speaker or the right speaker or somewhere in between. After this, we have Stereo Enhance. This is doing the same thing, but it's bringing it to the sides. What this does is it can take a mono signal, for example, or something that is in the middle. So this sound is recorded dead center, and it can bring it to the sides of the speakers and brings it out more. It enhances the stereo quality of the sound. So that is what it's doing. If you're wearing headphones, you should be able to hear it more on the left side of your head and right side of your head at the same time, versus when it was 0, you should be hearing it more in the center of your head. So this is a really good tool for mixing. Next, we have the Tremolo. The Tremolo is the effect that changes the volume up and down. It is the same as before, but you can now change and affect how harsh the transition is using the waveform parameter. Next, we have Vibrato, which is the same thing as a tremolo, but instead of alternating the volume of a track, it alters the pitch of the track. And again, we can set up the rate to change how often that goes. The color is just how bright or dark the sound is, and how in depth is just the intensity. So you'll be able to hear the pitch kind of going up and down. And I'll have the direct level at 0, so you just hear the movement of this sound. Pattern slicer is like the one that we had on the MK1. However, the patterns are longer and they're different. Now, you can use this like the auto riff in a sense of like if you don't know what melody you want, you can use the auto riff to figure that out. But in this case, if you don't know what kind of slicer pattern you want, you can use this to kind of figure out a slicer pattern. This is heavily updated from the MK2 because you have a lot more control over even just the pattern versions. And this allows you to do all sorts of different things. So some of the patterns are the same, but a lot of them are going to be different. So you have a lot more control now over that. With that said, let's move on to the step slicer. And the step slicer is another slicer, but you can customize your own slicing, which is a really cool idea. So you can replicate old patterns, like in the chart that you see here. This chart breaks down every single slicer pattern on the MK1 and what those do. So if you want to replicate any of those, you can absolutely do that. You have the controls, just like a sequencer, of how many steps you want the slicer to have, and the depth as well. Next up is delay, and this is the same as the old device, but with some EQing options here. Panning delay, again, same as the old device, but with some EQing. Now the reverse delay, instead of playing the delayed portion as is, it actually reverses that delayed portion. So if we have, let's say, this beat, we can change the rate to a quarter note, so then you'll hear the reversed portion happen afterwards. So the reverse portion is the reverse delay. In fact, we can increase the feedback here. Next, we have the modulating delay. Modulating delay is like the tape echo, but it's not as harsh, and it modulates the echoed portion's pitch. You really notice this at much faster rates, and you can also glitch it by changing the rate or the time mid-sound. So I'll show you that here. So let me show you what that sounds like. I'll have it at a higher rate so you can hear it. So you can hear how it sounds very similar to a tape echo. Speaking of tape echo, our next effect is tape echo. Now we have tape echo 1 and 2. Again, these should just be different modes, but that is essentially what they are. So we have the MK1 version and we have the MK2 version. The MK1 version is the same, but we have some EQing options, and the MK2 version is very much updated. It allows you to alter the time for the tape echo. So the main difference between them is the parameters that you can change and the specificity that you can have with your tape echo. Next, we have the granular delay. This is the same as it always has been, but we don't have a sequencer, which again, we have been sequencing on with the granular delay for so many years. I don't know why there's not a sequencer on the granular delay. Speaking of things they should have added, here's some things that they shouldn't have. Warp is a failure. What it does is it just repeats the sound and then blows up. And it doesn't even work very well because if you notice, nothing's happening. Well, if you change to the effect, it won't do anything. So you have to reset it, and then it'll do something. That's all the warp does. It is wild. It would be like having a delay, but you can't control the note. You can't control the distance between the echoes. You can't control any parameter except the volume, and it takes forever to build up, and you just have to deal with it. Next, a little more useful, is the twist. Now, the twist you've heard a lot of you loopers using as buildups for drops. That's what they're using, is a twist. Very, very cool. You can change the release. So when you release the button or release it, do you want it to fall like in pitch like it did before, or do you want to just fade out? You can even control the time of the rise and the fall to go with your mix or with your track. Next, we have roll 1 and roll 2. Again, MK1 version, it's the same. MK2 version, not the same. Holy crap. The roll 2 is massively improved. This is more similar to rolls on DJ decks. And by that I mean it rolls when it's on and stops when it's off. Another difference is that it has memory. It will save what it was rolling on. And that includes when you turn it off as well. So if you actually go to off, it will save what you have. But if you notice, I have to actually capture the sound. So in a way, it's like a roll and a beat repeat got combined into itself. Let's see if we can make some cool like extra tone beats with this roll. So we have it on the beginning. It wasn't recording. It's recording nothing. So if we go over here, it will capture something. And then it turns off once you let go. Next up is freeze. It's like the roll, but with a fade. What this will do is it'll sustain a sound forever until it is released, and then it will fade out over time. We're almost done. Bear with me here. We got chorus. Chorus is the same as the old device, but we have some EQing options. Next, we have the reverb. It's the same, but we have a few more like extra parameters here, and even has a delay function in which we can delay when the reverb actually kicks in. Which is awesome. Gate reverb is like a reverb, but it cuts itself off before it finishes. So it waits for the sound to reach its threshold, whatever threshold that you determined. Once it is below that threshold, it will cut itself off. One cool thing I've noticed about this is putting the time at like 0 and the threshold at 0. You get some really cool effects with drums. After gate reverb, we have reverse reverb. This is like the reverse delay, in which the delayed portion comes back reversed. It is the same thing here. So it reverses the reverb portion. And then finally, we have the 4 track effect exclusive effects. You will only find these on track effects A and none of the other buttons. And they are beat scatter, beat repeat, beat shift, and vinyl flick. They are in a different order than they are on the MK1, which is kind of frustrating, but they do all the same thing that the MK1's version did. There may be an updated algorithm to some of these, like the vinyl flick sounds different. but for the most part, these are all the same. Even the beat scatter patterns are the same as they are on the MK1, which has its own scary chart, but they still even have some of the same glitches, like the vinyl flick still breaks if you have a track on reverse. And that is it. That is every single effect on the MK2. Finally, now there is a video that shows you what every effect does and how to use it. Have fun, play around with these, find out what fun things you can do with them. Hopefully this gives you a better understanding on how the effects sound and feel on this device. That's it. Check out any of the other tutorials that is in this playlist to learn more in depth on how these effects are. Thank you so much for coming along with me this last year, learning about this device and the MK1. I hope you have as much fun using these things as I do. All right. Thank you for watching. See ya.